Sevastopol Bay is burning, and not in the way Moscow can hide this time. Not in the way state television can dress up with stock footage and confident anchors. Two of Russia's largest amphibious landing ships, the Yamal and the Nikolai Filchenkov, sit immobilized in the water of an occupied harbor that was advertised for the better part of a decade as the most heavily defended naval base in the entire Black Sea theater. A Podlyot K, one low-altitude radar system, the system specifically designed to see exactly what Ukraine just sent through the defensive bubble, is destroyed. 5 Russian vessels in total were struck inside that bay across a single night. And the combined hardware, troop lift capacity, command value, and replacement cost behind what was hit, when you add in the trained crews, the doctrinal role of those ships, and the operational depth they were supposed to provide to Russian forces across the southern axis, runs comfortably into the $1.8 billion range once you account for what Russia actually lost in capability, not just in scrap metal. This is not a story about 2 old ships. This is a case study in why Russia's entire theory of how to hold Crimea was wrong from the first hour of this war. Let me walk you through what this actually means at the strategic level, because the mainstream framing of this strike is going to miss almost everything that matters. I have spent decades studying how armies move, how navies defend themselves, and how empires lose control of seas they once treated as their private lake. And what I am telling you is this: the April 18th to 19th operation by Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, executed by its primary special unit alongside the SBU's Center A. That operation is not the headline. The headline is what the operation proves about the structural condition of the Black Sea Fleet in 2026. Pull the lens back. Russia's navy in this theater is no longer a fleet in the classical sense. It is a collection of survivors hiding from a country that, on paper, does not even have a navy. Let that sink in for a moment. Ukraine has no destroyers, no frigates, no cruisers, no carrier. Ukraine lost almost the entirety of its naval inventory in 2014 when Russia seized Crimea. And yet, by early 2026, roughly 30% of the Russian Black Sea Fleet's combat strength has been destroyed or seriously damaged. The fleet has been pushed out of Sevastopol, pushed out of Novorossiysk, scattered across smaller anchorages, and forced to operate under a permanent shadow of aerial, surface, and subsurface unmanned threat. That is not a battlefield setback. That is a category-level military reversal, and it was carried out by a country with sea drones built for a fraction of the price of a single Russian missile. Now rewind, because to understand why this strike on the Yamal and the Filchenkov matters, you have to understand what Russia believed about Crimea before this war began. In 2014, when Russian forces seized the peninsula, the doctrinal logic inside the Russian general staff was clean and at the time defensible. Crimea was supposed to be a fortress. It was supposed to be the southern anchor of Russian power projection across the Black Sea, the Mediterranean approach, the Caucasus flank, and into the eastern Mediterranean by way of Tartus. The Black Sea Fleet was the instrument that made that anchor real. Landing ships like the Filchenkov, commissioned in 1975, and the Yamal, commissioned in 1988, were the connective tissue of that doctrine. They moved armor, they moved troops, they moved fuel, ammunition, and the heavier logistics that road and rail could not deliver fast enough. They were the maritime spine of any serious Russian operation along Ukraine's southern coast. That doctrine assumed 3 things. First, that Russia would always control the air and sea around Crimea. Second, that any Ukrainian counter-threat to the fleet would come from conventional platforms Russia knew how to fight: surface ships, manned aircraft, traditional submarines. Third, that the geographic distance between Ukrainian-controlled territory and the Crimean bases would impose its own protective buffer. Distance in the Russian mind was a wall. Sevastopol Bay, deep, fortified, ringed by air defenses and electronic warfare assets, was supposed to be the safest piece of water in the entire theater. Every single one of those assumptions has now collapsed. And the strike on the Yamal and the Filchenkov is the moment when that collapse stopped being an argument and became a verdict. And it gets even more serious from here, because what hit those ships was not a missile fired from a NATO-supplied aircraft. It was not a Storm Shadow, not a Scalp, not an ATACMS. It was Ukraine's own unmanned surface and aerial drone architecture, refined over 3 years of relentless iteration, operated by special forces who have learned to fight a navy without having one. The primary unit, the SBU's Center A, the Group 13 operators who pioneered the Magura 5-5 platform, these are not large organizations. These are small, lethal, doctrinally novel formations that have done something no Western naval planners seriously believed possible in 2022. They have, in the words of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense's own assessment, effectively driven Russia's surface fleet out of the Western Black Sea. Now let me show you the milestones, because the chronology matters. Without the chronology, you cannot see the pattern. And without the pattern, you cannot understand why Russia keeps losing the same battle in the same way. The first warning came in October 2022 when a coordinated drone boat and aerial drone swarm hit Sevastopol naval base directly. Russia treated it as a one-off. A clever attack, yes, but not a structural threat. That assumption was the first mistake, and it was not a tactical mistake. It was psychological. Then came February 2024. Ukrainian Magura 5 sea drones, 8 of them, attacked and sank the Caesar Kunikov, a Rapucha-class landing ship of the same family as the vessels just hit in April 2026. That strike alone took out a platform valued in the tens of millions of dollars, eliminated a strategic lift asset, and demonstrated that Russian large landing ships were not just vulnerable, they were targetable, killable, and replaceable only at a cost Russia could not absorb at scale. Then the Sea Baby platform appeared, capable of carrying explosive payloads measured in hundreds of kilograms, eventually upgraded in late 2025 to a variant Ukraine claimed could strike anywhere across the entire Black Sea basin. Then came the world-first sea drone-launched air-to-air engagement, in which a Magura platform destroyed a Russian Su-30 fighter jet, a moment that fundamentally rewrote what a surface drone is even allowed to be in modern doctrine. This is the hidden military variable casual coverage misses. The Magura and Sea Baby platforms are not boats with bombs strapped to them. They are modular weapons systems. They carry naval mines. They carry anti-aircraft missiles derived from modified R-73 air-to-air weapons. They carry rocket pods. They carry strike drones launched from their own decks. They are, in operational terms, miniature unmanned destroyers built for roughly the cost of a luxury sedan. And Russia has no proven scalable counter to them. The real question is not whether Ukraine can sink Russian ships. Ukraine has answered that question. The real question is whether Russia can keep any major naval asset alive in the Black Sea long enough to perform its assigned mission. And the answer to that question, as of April 2026, is no. Not at Sevastopol. Not at Feodosia. Not at Novorossiysk, 200 miles east of Crimea, where the Black Sea Fleet relocated specifically to escape Ukrainian reach. The fleet ran. The drones followed. On the night of March 1st to 2nd, 2026, a hybrid Ukrainian swarm hit Novorossiysk itself, and the sanctuary illusion died there. Pull the lens back again, because this is where the analysis has to move from tactical to industrial, and from industrial to state-level consequence. When you immobilize the Yamal and the Filchenkov in Sevastopol Bay, you are not just damaging 2 ships. You are dismantling Russia's amphibious lift capability in the entire southern theater. The Project 775 Rapucha class and the Project 1171 Tapir class were the workhorses of every serious troop and armor movement Russia conducted by sea in this war. They were how Russia reinforced Crimea. They were how Russia surged supplies into the southern axis when ground logistics through Kerch were strained. They were how, in any future contingency, Russia would attempt amphibious pressure against Odessa or the Danube approaches. Russia is not building replacements. Let me be precise about that because it matters enormously. The Russian shipbuilding industry is operating under sanctions, under shortages of Western marine diesel components, under shortages of advanced electronics, and under shortages of skilled welders and naval engineers who have either been mobilized, killed, or have left the country. The large landing ship class that Yamal and Filchenkov belong to is functionally out of production. The replacements Russia is building, the Project 11711 Ivan Gren and Pyotr Morgunov class, are being delivered at a pace measured in years per haul, not months. Russia cannot replace these losses on any timeline that matters in this war. So when you read that one strike disabled 2 ships worth a combined $150 million in raw replacement value, that number understates the strategic damage by a full order of magnitude. The capability lost, the trained crew, the doctrinal role, the lift capacity, the logistics flexibility, the ability to conduct any kind of amphibious threat against Ukraine's coast. That capability is gone, and Russia cannot manufacture it back. Add in the Podlyat K-1 radar, the Azov, the Olshansky, the reconnaissance ship Slavudik reportedly damaged in the same operation, the supporting infrastructure of the harbor itself, the troops and equipment that were aboard or in proximity, the doctrinal embarrassment of losing 5 vessels in a single night inside a base Moscow declared secure. And you arrive at the $1.8 billion figure that headlines this analysis. That figure is not propaganda. It is the honest accounting of what Russia just lost, measured the way a serious military economist would measure it. This matters enormously because Russia's southern strategy depended on this fleet. And the southern strategy was the only strategy in this war that, even in 2024, still gave the Kremlin a credible theory of escalation against Ukrainian coastal infrastructure, against the grain corridor, and against any future pressure on Odessa. That theory is now dead. And it gets even more serious from here, because the operation on the night of April 18th to 19th was not Ukraine's climax. It was Ukraine demonstrating a routine. Let me explain what I mean by routine, because this is the part that should be keeping Russian admirals awake. When a military force conducts a single spectacular strike, that is a raid. When a military force conducts the same kind of strike against the same kind of target in the same defended harbor over and over again across multiple years, with steadily improving precision and steadily improving payload, that is no longer a raid. That is a sustained campaign. That is doctrine. And once a campaign becomes doctrine, the defending force is no longer being surprised. The defending force is being processed. Russia is being processed in the Black Sea. The pattern is now visible to anyone willing to look at it without flinching. Step 1. Ukraine identifies a high-value Russian naval asset inside what Moscow believes is a secure perimeter. Step 2. Ukrainian intelligence builds the route, the timing, and the swarm composition required to penetrate that perimeter. Step 3. The strike is executed by a small special unit using unmanned platforms costing a tiny fraction of the target. Step 4. The loss is real, the replacement is impossible, and the Russian command response is to retreat further east, deeper, smaller, more defensive. Step 5. Ukrainian range extends to wherever Russia retreated. Repeat, that is not a war Russia can win at sea. That is a war Russia is losing one harbor at a time on a clock it does not control. Now, the climactic operation of this campaign, the one that frames everything I have just walked you through, is the strike inside Sevastopol Bay itself. Because Sevastopol is not just a port. Sevastopol is the symbolic and operational heart of the entire Russian Black Sea Fleet, the historical capital of Russian naval identity since the 18th century. The argument Moscow has made for 240 years is that Sevastopol is Russian, that Sevastopol is defended, and that Sevastopol cannot be touched. Every Russian schoolchild has been taught some version of that story. Every Russian admiral has built their career on the assumption that the bay itself is sacred ground. On the night of April 18th to 19th, 2026, that assumption ended. Unmanned Ukrainian platforms penetrated the bay, struck 5 vessels including 2 of the most important amphibious assets Russia had left in the theater, destroyed the radar system specifically designed to prevent such an attack, and exited without Russia being able to credibly claim it had stopped the operation in progress. The Russian Ministry of Defense did not even immediately comment because there was no comment that would not be humiliating. Let me give you the broader lesson, because this is what casual coverage of this strike will never tell you. The lesson is not that Ukraine has clever drones. The lesson is that the entire 20th century model of naval power projection, the model that says a large state with a large fleet can dominate a smaller state along a contested sea, has been broken in front of us in real time by a country fighting for survival. Cheap, networked, autonomous systems built by a determined adaptive force have neutralized a navy that was supposed to be one of the most formidable in the world. The implications run far beyond Ukraine. History will record that the Black Sea was the laboratory in which the era of the large surface combatant began to end. Every navy on the planet is watching. The Chinese are watching what Ukraine did to Russia's amphibious lift because they have to model what Taiwan could do to a People's Liberation Army Navy crossing the strait. The Iranians are watching. The Houthis are watching. NATO planners are watching because the lessons from the Black Sea are about to reshape budget priorities across every Western Navy that has spent the last 20 years building exquisite, expensive, low-density platforms. And Russia is watching too, but Russia is watching from the inside of the case study, not from the outside. So here's the verdict, and I will give it to you cleanly. Ukraine did not just destroy roughly $1.8 billion in Russian troops and equipment on the night of April 18th to 19th. Ukraine demonstrated again that the Russian theory of Crimea is broken, that the Russian theory of distance as protection is broken, that the Russian theory of Sevastopol as sanctuary is broken, that the Russian theory of large landing ships as a usable instrument in this theater is broken, and that the Russian theory of a Black Sea fleet capable of contesting the southern axis is, at this point, indistinguishable from fiction. The forecast is straightforward. Expect more strikes inside Sevastopol Bay. Expect more strikes against the Novorossiysk basin. Expect Ukrainian range to continue extending eastward as new variants of the Magura and Sea Baby platforms enter service. Expect Russia to lose additional high-value vessels across the next operational cycle because the doctrine that put those vessels in harm's way has not been corrected, and at this point in the war cannot be corrected. The institutional learning curve required to fix Russia's naval posture in the Black Sea is longer than the war itself is likely to last. The unresolved question, the one I want you sitting with, is not whether Russia can hold Crimea militarily. That question is now answered in the negative on the maritime axis. The unresolved question is what Moscow does politically when the symbolic loss of Sevastopol as a safe harbor becomes undeniable inside Russia itself. Because a Black Sea fleet that cannot defend its own capital harbor is not a fleet. It is a flag. And flags do not hold peninsulas. These are the developments that decide wars. These are the moments when the architecture of a campaign quietly shifts beneath the headlines, while casual observers are still arguing about the previous month's frontline map. If you want to keep seeing the war the way it actually moves, at the level of doctrine, capability, and structural failure rather than daily noise, stay with this channel. Subscribe so the next analysis reaches you the moment it is ready, and so we can keep building toward the audience goal that lets this work continue at the depth it deserves. There are more strikes coming. There are more verdicts coming. And the story of how a country without a navy dismantled one of the largest fleets in Europe is only halfway told. I will see you in the next analysis.